think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
Welcome back to the program. We have Congressman Bruce Westerman is with us. Merry Christmas to you, Bruce.
Merry Christmas to you too, Paul. Now, how does a guy follow Johnny Bell or Johnny Cash singing "I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day" and then talking about the reason for the season and Christ's birth, and then go into politics?
I know, right?
You're setting it up tough for me this morning, Paul.
It is tough, and it really and truly, I'll be honest with you, I've been reading a lot in the book of Ecclesiastes, and when Solomon talks about, it's all his vanity and his grasping at the wind, and I really, that's the way I feel about the political environment right now, and apparently nothing's new under the sun. So, Congress,
doesn't he finish? Doesn't he finish that by saying, all his vanities except to fear God and obey His commands?
Yes.
That's how he wraps that up.
You're exactly right. It's the entire theme of the book, from what I can tell, is life is meaningless, but God gives it meaning. I mean, that seems to be what it is. It's like left by ourselves. I mean, we're just left to toil under the sun, and it's kind of a miserable existence. But God is the one that makes it better and gives us purpose.
That's pretty much the story of life, I believe.
Yeah, it really is.
Story of Christmas and the whole, all wrapped into one.
Yeah, man, that's good. Well, to, I guess, devolve the conversation that right now is certainly more enlightening than it's going to be. What's going on in Washington, D.C.? I know President Trump, did he call Speaker Ryan in the middle of your conference yesterday? Tell us how those events unfolded.
Yeah, so we were having our conference meeting. That's where all the Republicans get together the morning after we fly in for votes. So we were having that meeting, and it's where we kind of lay out the game plan and what's going to happen. And the Senate had passed that continuing resolution without any funding for the wall in it, and that didn't sit very well with our conference. So there was it's supposed to be a 1-hour conference, and in an hour and a half to 2 hours, we were still going strong, debating why this wasn't the right thing to do. And it was about that time that Paul Ryan had to step out and take a call from the president, and then he and Kevin McCarthy went over to the White House, and the next thing you know, we got a bill we got the Senate's bill, and we're amending it to put disaster relief funding for some of the coastal states, Florida and Georgia, from the hurricanes, which, that hurricane damage down there was catastrophic, and it's just really not been in the news that much, but lots and lots of damage done down there, and plus the wildfires out in California. So there were a lot of members that didn't want to leave before Christmas without doing something on the disaster relief. And also there was a lot who didn't want to pass up this opportunity to do more for border security. So we ended up putting those amendments on the bill and sending it back to the Senate last night. Some of them had already gone home, so I guess they're traveling back up here today. But the ball's kind of in the Senate's court. And as you know, it takes 60 votes to do anything in the Senate. I think Steve Daines and the president have both been tweeting this morning about how they should do the what they call the nuclear option, but remove the rule that requires 60 votes to have a vote. and go ahead and vote on this funding bill. But a lot of drama playing out, and we're just here on hold in the House right now, waiting to see what the Senate's reaction will be.
You know, it's been a wild 48 hours. There was a lot of people that thought President Trump was not going to blink, and then it seemed like he acquiesced, but then that wasn't the case. Now, I mean, he essentially said, look, I'm going to veto a bill if it doesn't have adequate funding for border security. And, you know, I've been listening to some of his critics, and, you know, the only thing that I keep hearing, kind of a common theme generally, is, well, you know, President Trump he's not doing things the way you're supposed to do it in this town. And I think, wow, that's got to be kind of refreshing then. I mean, it's refreshing to me. It's refreshing to most of the country.
When you get outside the Beltway, I don't know that message is all that bad. But you know, it's the chewing of the fingernails and sweaty brows up here in D.C. right now. It's this is a world all on its own. So I'll be glad to exit the place and hopefully go home for Christmas at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have any plans to return right at the moment. You know, when this is a serious problem. The president is, you know, they're trying to spin it. He's just trying to protect campaign promises, which he is trying to do that. But there's a major security issue on our southern border. There's enough fentanyl came across the border that was seized last year to kill 500 million people. Fentanyl is now the number one killer drug in the U.S., and we seized enough to kill 500 million people. 2 to 3 milligrams is a lethal dose, and you know, you're only talking about a ton and a half or so of fentanyl that would kill that many people, and that's what we seized along the border. There are 10 people with terrorist ties that come across the border that are seized along the border every day. And for some reason, those numbers aren't getting out into the mainstream media. But it's a legitimate concern that the president has.
And it's certainly one, like you said, he campaigned on. And what's so wrong with fulfilling a campaign promise when that was your main point and that's why you got elected? I mean, you'd think even the Democrats, I mean, I know their base would revolt, but, you know, you'd think there'd be some sort of consideration of like, well, you know, this is what the majority of the people voted for. I mean, of course, you know, they're going to say, well, it wasn't a popular vote, but, you know, whatever. I mean, this is the way our system works. So,
and if people will look at this for what's really happening, so a lot of it has to do with Nancy Pelosi's speakership. She's trying to fulfill promises so she can get votes to be the speaker in the next Congress, and she wasn't even really in the conversation because we had the votes to pass the bill out of the House that she said we didn't have, and we showed her yesterday we did have a vote. But the original meeting where Schumer went to the White House to meet with Trump, she weaseled her way into that meeting, and then she's the one pressuring Schumer as much as anyone to hold out in the Senate because she's scared that if we pass border security funding, that it's going to cost her speakership in the House. So a lot of this is self-centeredness on Nancy Pelosi's part, trying to protect her own hide and her own political aspirations, and it has to do anything about the country.
Wow. Now, see, I hadn't heard that analysis at all. So you're saying that a lot of this has to do with the fact that Nancy Pelosi's putting pressure on Schumer to not, you know, be more, you know, persuaded to, you know, let the Democrats go ahead and vote, and give the president what he wants, what he campaigned on, and keep the government open. It's Nancy Pelosi. So you're saying that there's still a chance that there's some people in the Democrat Party that really are not on board with this Nancy Pelosi being speaker again.
Oh yeah, and you know, it's been a lot of that's been published. She's made promises that she'll only serve for 4 years. She's doing everything she can to secure the votes she needs to be the speaker. You know, to my knowledge, unless they've done it and it hasn't been reported, they haven't voted in their caucus yet on who their caucus is nominating for speaker.
Wow.
Which that usually happens the week after election. So she's still playing internal political games, and it'll be interesting to watch how hard the left really now,
Yeah,
they're going to be pulling them very far to the left.
I think you're right.
And there's some good Democrats up here that are they want what's best for the country. I mean, it's just like people want to paint with a broad brush. They're reasonable Democrats, but they're getting more and more marginalized in their party now. And you've got a growing pull to the left that's way out there to the left, almost unrecognizable. They talk about being a liberal, but it's a modern sense of liberal. It's not the classic sense of liberalism and freedom.
Yeah,
it's a freedom without responsibility is what they're promoting.
We're talking with Congressman Bruce Westerman. So what are your thoughts? I know it's impossible to predict, but do you think we're going to go towards a government shutdown? I mean, that's what it looks like.
Well, we're headed that way. Fortunately, we've already funded about 75% of the government, which includes the military. And if, all these shutdowns we've had in the past, the people end up getting paid in the end. But I know that doesn't give some of those government employees a lot of comfort right now. But we're going to have to work out the differences and come up with some kind of a solution at some point. There's $5 billion isn't even the full amount it would take to secure the southern border. It's just money to do work down there, and the administration apparently has found funds from other sources that they can transfer to work in that area, but there will be legal challenges to that.
Yes, there will. Let me ask you about that. Let's say we go to a government shutdown, a partial government shutdown. I personally think if it gets to that point, Trump will try to go for the record of longer than like 21 days. That's just my personal feeling on it. But he has said 2 or 3 times now, and it gets reported, and then nobody really talks about it, that one way or the other, he's going to get his wall, and if that means using Department of Defense funds to have the military build the wall, he'll do it. Now, I mean, this is a novel idea, but do you think he can use that authority and have the military go down there and start constructing barriers?
I think there would be legal challenges to that. So that would have to be answered in the courts, but whether he would try it or not, I don't know.
Okay, so we'll have to see. We'll wait and see. I mean, the government. It looks. I mean, I think we will go to a partial government shutdown, and I really think it's. I think it's what the Trump base certainly wants, and I think it's pretty clear at this point. President Trump tried to use the process that was there. He did get it out of the House, proving that Nancy Pelosi was wrong, and now it is on the Senate. And so it'll be interesting to see what the optics are and how everybody responds. Congressman Bruce Westerman, tell me about the Walnut Grove Land Exchange Act.
Yeah, apart from the funding of the rest of the government for the fiscal year, there's been some good things happening here this week. It's just a bill that is in my affects a church congregation in my district. The Walnut Grove Community Church. They've had a church and a cemetery on this ground since the 1800s, before the Forest Service was ever established. And a later survey showed that their cemetery was on Forest Service land. So for over 20 years, they've been trying to swap out the land with the Forest Service. It could have been done administratively, but if you've never worked with a federal bureaucracy, it's just one excuse after the other. I mean, you almost expect they're going to tell me something, and then they're going to come back 3 weeks and tell me, or 3 months later and tell me it's going to be another 3 months, and that just drags on forever. So we stepped in and said if the Forest Service won't act, we'll pass a bill that forces them to trade the land. And it's actually 6.3 acres of land adjoining the Forest Service that gets traded for about 3 acres that the church cemetery is on. So the Forest Service comes out with more land. But long story short, we had to pass a bill out of the House. It passed nearly 400 votes And then Senator Bozeman was able to get it hotlined through the Senate this week. So that bill's going on to President Trump's desk. So that's just a small victory for the citizens of the 4th District and those parishioners there at the Walnut Grove Community Church. We also got the Farm Bill passed. I was at the signing for that yesterday with the President, which has a lot of impact in Arkansas. And we also got this Criminal Justice Reform Act passed, which was both the Farm Bill and the Criminal Justice Reform Act were huge bipartisan bills that you've probably not heard much about this week because all the focus is on this wall funding.
Yeah, but those are some. That is a big deal, especially that Criminal Justice Reform Act. Everybody always talks about how we need to be more bipartisan, and then when we are, it doesn't really get talked about that much. So it makes me kind of think that maybe they don't really want, the media really doesn't care about being bipartisan. Congressman Bruce, go ahead.
Bipartisan and the system working like it's designed to, that doesn't sell much in the news.
That's right.
I had a reporter tell me a long time ago, he said that the sun comes up every morning. It's a miraculous feat. It's a beautiful thing, but nobody's going to report on it. But said one day if the sun doesn't come up, you've got a heck of a story there.
That's true. That's true.
What they like to get reported on mostly, the bad stuff.
Well, Congressman Bruce Westerman, again, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for your votes, and Merry Christmas to you and your family.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you too, Paul.
All righty.
And hopefully I'll get back to Arkansas for that. But if not, we'll celebrate it up here in the swamp.
That's right. That's right.
Swampy Christmas.
That's exactly right. Yeah, just slightly better than like celebrating Christmas in like the trenches of World War I. Slightly better.
Yeah.
Bruce,
yeah.
I appreciate it, sir. Folks, we're going to take a break here, listen to a little bit more Johnny Cash singing Silent Night.
It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, welcome back. Merry Christmas, ladies and gentlemen. I want to introduce you to a man by the name of Jim Hester. Jim is the author of a book called Two Tribes. I've got the Amazon link here pulled up. Two Tribes, Rebuilding Team America in a Post-Truth World. Jim, welcome to Conduit News Radio. How are you this morning?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me.
Now, is it, we were looking at the area code. Are you live over in the West Coast, right? So is it 5:30 where you are right now?
It is, yes.
Well, thank you for getting up so early for us. We really appreciate it.
No problem.
So tell us a little bit about your book. What's it about? Why did you write it?
Well, it's an examination of the partisanship in our country that's dividing and harming our nation. I have 4 children. I'm concerned about their future. There's always been partisanship in the United States, going back to the days.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is building a liberty machine. Find out more at conduitnews.com.
Welcome, folks, to the program for the first time. I want to introduce you to Mr. Justin A. Torres. He is a D.C.-based attorney, and he is a member of the Federalist Society. He has represented parties in high-stakes civil and criminal matters in the United States Supreme Court, federal courts of appeals, state Supreme Courts. He's been named a rising star by super lawyers in Washington, D.C. Hey, Justin, welcome to the program, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to have you on because I understand you've been following this census question. Is that correct? They're going to add a question on the census as to whether or not, are you a citizen or are you not a citizen?
That's right. They're going to ask a question for everyone who responds to the census. Is this person a U.S. citizen? And if they're a naturalized citizen, what year were they naturalized?
Okay, yeah. Sorry, Justin. We're having just a little bit of trouble hearing you, so if you could just speak right into your microphone, yes, that's much better. The Supreme Court, they're going to hear arguments on this. Is that right? Because of obviously anything that happens at this point, somebody's going to sue somebody, right?
That's right. The court is going to hear arguments in February on a somewhat narrow question about whether the plaintiffs in all of these cases that are challenging the census question can get the deposition of Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross. And that's actually, it's a really unusual circumstance. Normally in what are called administrative law cases where you're dealing with, what is a federal agency doing, the court relies on the written record of the agency's decision-making process, and there's no depositions or questioning of agency officials or anything like that. But the judge in that New York case said that he thought there was evidence that even though there was an explanation that was given by Commerce Secretary Ross about why he chose to include this question, that he felt there was evidence that that wasn't the real reason, and that there was a hidden racially tinged or racially discriminatory reason. And so he's allowed that deposition to go forward, and the court's going to hear whether or not they've stated, and they're going to hear argument on whether or not they're going to allow that deposition to go forward. But I also expect that just the question generally, like the merits question of whether the Trump administration has the power to add this question to the census, is going to be before the court for too much longer.
So what do you think they're afraid of? I mean, why are people suing? You think it's about the districts and what they might look like if we have an accurate depiction of how many United States citizens we have in our country?
Yeah, the question, the argument that a lot of opponents of adding this question make is that if you ask this question, non-citizens, illegal immigrants in the United States are not going to answer because they're going to fear enforcement. They're going to fear that that's going to reveal their illegal status, and they're going to be deported. So they won't answer, therefore they won't be counted in the head count, and therefore they won't be counted for purposes of redrawing the district line. And a lot of people don't realize that in the United States today, congressional district lines are based on total population and not on citizen population. So the non-citizens are being counted for purposes of congressional representation, and that, after the 2010 census, it was estimated that there were something in the neighborhood of about 4 to 8 seats, several of them in California, Texas, and Arizona, that would have shifted to other states if the count had been based solely on citizen population instead of all population.
Wow. So that would mean, obviously, California is a much more blue state, and so we would have maybe a few more. You just would be uncertain. You don't know if it would be a Democrat for Democrat, but if it moved to another state, it's not. California is a very, very, very different place than even the states around it.
Right. Yeah. It's California of that. 5 to 8 probably accounts for 3 to 5 of those seats, and it's estimated that one of those seats would probably go to Louisiana, one would probably go to Arkansas, one would probably go to North Carolina. So you're distributing seats in very different parts of the country, and what would the ultimate effect be? Not entirely clear, but certainly there would be some effect. So that's the concern. And then you have concerns. People have concerns about things like federal block granting. And Medicare, Medicaid, things like that are driven by population formulas, and there's the concern that states with high illegal populations are going to lose out if you're not counting illegals.
So I want to kind of park real quick on something you just said. I know it's speculative, but you're saying, this is an Arkansas, radio.
Jefferson and Hamilton, and there always will be, because people look at the world differently and people have different philosophies. But we have to remember we're on the same team, and the partisanship that has always existed has in recent years become tribalistic. And what I mean by that is that we tend to view the other tribe as being the enemy, and our own tribe, we're blind to our own flaws. But we have to remember we're on the same team. So I've used a football analogy in this book. I've looked at a lot of issues confronting America and tried to analyze it from the perspective of the team. You may not agree with all the viewpoints of your teammates, but nonetheless, for the sake of your own team and its success, you have to work together and try to solve common problems. So I wrote this book hoping to make a better world for my kids' future.
Well, and I certainly think most people out there would definitely agree with that sentiment. What would you say to those that say right now, though, we can't seem to agree on what the goals are? Do you think that's why we're not a team, because we have different goals?
Well, that's part of it, but we have to focus on what we do agree on, and we have to stop the name-calling and the insults and the belligerent and hostile attacks on each other. The fact that you may not agree with the person on the other side of the aisle doesn't mean they're your enemy. So let's treat each other with civility. I'm an attorney by trade, and I argue cases against my opponents, but I don't destroy them personally. I don't demonize them. And I think the same can be applied to our political leaders. There's no need to demonize everybody on the other side. So we have to figure out what we do agree on. There are things that the majority of Americans do agree on. Let's focus on that, and the other things will fall into place.
Well, so let me start by just saying, okay, I'm a talk radio host. I'm very conservative. I mean, I'm firmly implanted on the right. So let me just admit that right away. I'm sure you already knew that. But one of the things that I've noticed is, and yeah, this is a criticism of the left. I want to have, healthy debates. I want to have respectful debates with those who are on the other side. I'm not saying that I've never called someone a name. I know I have. And sometimes I felt bad about it. But it seems right now when we have these debates with the other side, or when I have them, the left seems to be coming at the argument as if they are already a morally superior person to me, because they already know kind of what my views are on whatever the specific subject is. And it's really hard to have a free, open exchange ideas. I don't presume to think that about the left, that I am morally superior. I mean, I understand the issues that we're talking about are complicated and people have different views on them. So what
Bringing you your daily dose of truth. It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
program, we're based in Arkansas. We're on several stations across the state. So you're saying that theoretically, if the number of United States citizens is actually, more, if it were more accurate and we had less illegal immigrants put in that category, that Arkansas might go from 4 congressional seats to 5?
Potentially, based on, it's always hard to say in hindsight because, there's some fairly complicated formulas, but Arkansas and Louisiana were 2 states that a lot of people thought in the 2010 census probably lost out relative to California because of California's significant illegal population kind of juicing the numbers so that there were additional congressional districts.
Wow, that is big news here. Today on the program that is even a possibility, because I knew there was the possibility that you've going to have some districts moving, but I didn't know that there were people that actually thought that Arkansas might be affected by that. That would be huge. So where do we go from here? I mean, do you think? And I haven't followed this as closely as I should. I've got this NPR article, which, by the way, is I really don't ever reference NPR much at all. But do you think this is, gonna, when the census goes out? I mean, there's not been an injunction stopping the question, has there?
Well, there hasn't yet, but that's only because we're still a little bit away from the census. But it is, the plaintiffs certainly are seeking an injunction, and the district court is going to issue an opinion. The district court in New York, which is the case that's furthest along, is probably going to issue an opinion here in the next, I would suspect, 2 to 4 weeks. The trial ended toward the end of November, and the judge said that he was likely to get an opinion out within about a month to 6 weeks. So
okay.
I think we're fairly close to an opinion. At the end of that, what's going to happen? Who knows? I think it is certainly very possible that judge will issue an injunction, at which case you're off to the races in terms of appellate court review in the Second Circuit. And I suspect this case will be heard on a relatively expedited manner up to the Supreme Court, because the Commerce Department and the Census Bureau have to have an answer, and they have to have an answer pretty soon. Census ballots, census forms have to be printed, and they have to be distributed. They have to be tested. So there's, this is not a ship that you can sort of turn on a dime.
Right.
But so I would expect we'll have an answer soon, and probably a definitive answer from the Supreme Court, certainly before the end of this term in June.
Good.
So I think we'll hear this question pretty quickly.
So, question, is this person a citizen of the United States? Yes, born in the United States. Yes, born in Puerto Rico, Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, or Northern Marianas. Yes, born abroad, U.S. citizen, parent or parents. Yes, U.S. citizen by naturalization, print year of naturalization. Or no, not a U.S. citizen. So here's my next question, Justin. We're talking with Justin Torres. He's a D.C.-based attorney. If this were to go forward, and let's say that there is a significant amount of illegal immigrants that were counted before, and now we know that they're not being counted, would anybody then compare that to the voter registration rolls, and would it maybe potentially reveal some massive voter fraud going on?
I mean, it's possible, right? One of the things I think that is driving this question is really it's very hard to formulate reasonable policy in the absence of data. And one of the things that's very clear is that there's a U.S. government official estimate of the number of illegal immigrants in the country, which is about 11 to 12 million. Anybody who studies this question on both sides of it, whether you're pro-illegal immigration or not, right, almost everybody agrees that estimate is really way too low. There was a Yale study that came out just a couple of weeks ago using some pretty sophisticated statistical analysis that compared responses to the American Community Survey, which is a yearly survey that comes out from the Census Bureau to a subset of the American population. And it asked this question. It asked the citizenship question. So it compared those results to objective government data like Social Security registration, and came up with an estimate of the illegal population that was twice the U.S. government's estimate. So their estimate was about 22 to 23 million. So it's pretty clear that we don't have a very good handle on what this number actually is, and that makes it hard to formulate all kinds of policies. How do you formulate any policy that is based on population if you don't have a really good sense of the population? Mm-hmm. It could have impacts in voter registration, enforcement issues, but all kinds of things. Block granting, as I mentioned, Medicaid, things like that.
Yeah, it goes to the very fundamental, concept of, what's prescribed in the Constitution to how to, get the right amount of representatives so we can govern ourselves. I mean, it's a big deal. It certainly is. And Justin, I just want to thank you for doing the work that you're doing on this and coming on the program and sharing some really valuable information with us about what we can expect. So, Justin Torres, I really appreciate it, sir.
Sure. Thank you much.
All righty.
Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. Are you a conservative-minded young person and want to let the world know about it? Are you tired of rolling your eyes as your professor regurgitates progressive, PC, neo-Marxist nonsense? Then you should interview on Conduit News Radio's Young Conservative segment and tell us about why you believe the way you do. Tell us how you came to be a conservative and what are your views on government. Now, if you're worried that your neo-Marxist professor may also be a right-wing talk radio listening masochist, then names can be changed to protect the innocent. It's the Conduit News Radio Conservative Future segment. To be interviewed, call 870-275-9799. That's 870-275-9799. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
Do you see that? Do you see that also in the way people are arguing with one another?
Well, yes, but the funny thing is that the folks on the left see the right in the same vein, in the same way. And the people on the right see the left in the same way as well. And it's easy to just say the other side's at fault, and my side is right and perfect and never wrong. And that's one of the things that bothers me, is that people don't seem to be able to criticize their own leaders nowadays. They don't seem to be able to take off their blinders. Everything their tribal leader says and does is right, and they won't speak up when they disagree. And so I have a quest to find the truth. And I don't care if my leader is the leader of my party or not. I will speak the truth. And that's the problem. Many people are just blinded by their hatred.
Determined to drain the swamp in Little Rock, it's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
This headline here, we got a Texas judge declares Obamacare unconstitutional. And in this story over at Talk Business and Politics, Roby Brock comments that the Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson commented on this, and essentially there's really no change here. According to the governor, let's see. At this time, there is no impact on Arkansas Works, which is our version of Medicaid expansion in the state, and the coverage will continue. The court decision is a clarion call for more long-term thinking on health care and what is the best way to give the states more flexibility in improving health care coverage for its citizens. It's no surprise that the individual mandate was ruled unconstitutional. The key question remains as to whether striking down the individual mandate, voids the entire law. This issue will ultimately be decided by the United States Supreme Court. That's Governor Asa Hutchinson on that. And with more on this, I want to bring in Mr. Michael Busler, Dr. Michael Busler, who is a public policy analyst and economics expert, a professor of finance at Stockton University in New Jersey. You've also read his columns in Newsmax, LifeSet, and townhall.com. Dr. Busler, good to have you back on, sir.
Good morning, Paul. How are you? It's my pleasure to be here.
Yes, sir. I'm doing fantastic.
Great.
What were your thoughts on this? Did you see this coming? Was this even on your radar?
Well, yes, it was. And frankly, I agree with everything your governor said. So let's go back to the beginning and see how this came about. So when they passed the Affordable Care Act in 2010, many people objected to it, saying that it was unconstitutional. And the reason was the government was forcing Americans to buy something that is health insurance. Because of what's called the Interstate Commerce Clause, it's against the law for the government to force an American to buy something. So the government's argument was, well, if they don't buy it, we're going to put on a penalty that they have to pay. They didn't call it a tax; they called it a penalty. Calling it a tax would probably have drawn a lot of ire from Americans, so they called it a penalty. So it got to the Supreme Court, and people argued that the government has no right to force Americans to buy anything. In a narrow decision, Chief Justice Roberts wrote the opinion for the majority, and he said the penalty is really a tax, and the government has the right to tax people. Now, when they put on a tax, they have to decide who's going to pay the tax. And in this case, the tax will be paid by people who do not purchase health insurance. So because it's a tax and they're deciding who to tax, the Supreme Court said that was legal and constitutional, and the law went into effect. However, the end of last year, Congress passed the tax reform bill. As part of the tax reform bill, they did away with that penalty for not purchasing health insurance. So now there was no tax placed on anybody not purchasing health insurance. So Judge O'Connor in Texas said, well, since the tax argument has gone away, the government cannot force someone to buy health insurance. Therefore, at least that portion of the law is unconstitutional, and because the law requires, from a financial standpoint, everybody buying health insurance or financially unstable, the whole law is then unconstitutional. And that's what he ruled. Your governor is right. It's not going to have any impact on next year because
there hasn't been an injunction yet, right?
Right, yeah. Not yet. Although there are 16 or 17 attorneys generals who are about to file an appeal on Judge O'Connor's decision, and again, your governor was right. It will go all the way up to the Supreme Court. It won't have any immediate effect because we've all signed contracts already for 2019. So those contracts remain in effect. I think what will happen is it'll get up to the Supreme Court probably in early 2020. Now we have a little wrinkle in there because that happens to be a presidential election year.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure, and you can never really predict, I don't think, what the Supreme Court will do. I think one likely outcome is I think the Supreme Court will agree that the current law is now unconstitutional without the tax. However, they'll say, look, it's not the Supreme Court's job to come up with laws. That's what Congress is supposed to do. So we're going to declare it unconstitutional. We'll stay the decision for, say, 3 or 6 months. And in that time, Congress will be forced to come up with a new health care plan that will pass Congress and will be signed by the president.
Gosh, yeah. And you're going to have the Democrats in control of the House. Man, that's going to be a mess.
Correct.
That's going to be a mess. And the media, the media is going to demagogue this like we've never seen before. It's going to be incredible.
Right. That's exactly right. It's going to get ugly.
And this is the problem. A lot of people think that John Roberts, if you read the dissenting opinion in the original challenge, it reads like the majority opinion, and so a lot of people think John Roberts switched at the last minute. They say it's a tax, and I don't necessarily want to relitigate all of this, but I just want to point out that when they ruled initially that Obamacare was a tax, when the President of the United States specifically said it wasn't a tax, even cited Webster's dictionary when he was challenged by George Snuffleupagus, as I call him. What kind of tax was it? Was it a capitation tax in the Constitution? No. Was it an excise tax in the Constitution? No. Was it an income tax? No. And it wasn't a tax. And matter of fact, saying that the government has the ability to do what they did and call it a tax, man, that to me just means, well, that means if Congress wants to mandate that I have to do other activities as well to be in good standing with them, they can just call it, well, it's just a tax on you. And so I thought it was very dangerous. I'm glad they got rid of the individual mandate. It was the most oppressive thing in the entire law. And who knew that it was going to maybe set a course to basically get rid of the whole thing, Michael?
Yeah, a couple things here. The whole Affordable Care Act was really presented to the American public somewhat deceptively. In fact, Jonathan Gruber, the MIT economist who was really the architect of the Affordable Care Act, said that we relied, and I quote, on the stupidity of the American people to get this through. So they said they didn't call the penalty a tax, because it really wasn't a tax, and I agreed. I was a little missed by John Roberts' position. And then they also said that pass this and your premiums will go down by about $2,500, and if you like your plan, you'll be able to keep your plan, and you'll be able to see whatever doctors you want to see. None of those things were true, and many people think that the Obama administration knew they weren't true, but they said that to the American public so that they would get support from the public and they would be able to get this passed. Also, remember, the Democrats had a majority in the House of Representatives when Senator Arlen Specter of Pennsylvania switched parties from Republican to Democrat. The Democrats had a supermajority, that is 60 senators. Therefore, they could pass the law without asking for one Republican vote. And as a result of that, they got zero input from the Republicans, and not one Republican supported the Affordable Care Act. In my view, that's really what started the divisiveness that we have in the country today. So the whole thing was, I think, not presented truthfully to the American public. And when all of the facts are coming out here, and I know it's 8 years later, but when all the facts are coming out here, and that we do note that part of it is indeed unconstitutional, now we have to come up with something new. Your point is also well taken. For the next 2 years, we have a democratically controlled House of Representatives, a Republican Senate, and a Republican president. In theory, that should be a good thing, because they'll have to come up with a compromise where the Democrats don't get everything they want, but they can support what's there. The Republicans don't get everything they want, but they can support what's there. And in theory, we should be able to come up with a good health care law. In practice, I will agree with you that it's going to get real nasty, and coming up with a good solution will be difficult.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of tests. I think there'll be some tests for Senate Republicans, quite honestly, to see how, are they willing to follow President Trump's lead in terms of how forceful he'll be in his negotiating style, let's say. And I think if there was ever a chance to get a good replacement to fix what is Obamacare, you're going to have a leader on your side that knows how to negotiate. And I think President Trump is certainly that guy. I just hope, you know what would be great? It would be great. I don't know if I have any confidence, but it would be great if they actually figured out a way to do all of the things they were promising would happen as a result of the first law. Meaning it would be great if they actually lowered the cost of health care, somehow made it more affordable. But I honestly, as an economist, Dr. Bussler, the only way to do that is to actually get the government out of the way. And I don't know if either party is going to do that.
No, the Republicans are more inclined to let the market determine this and let people make individual decisions for themselves. The Democrats are more inclined to have the government take over everything, and indeed some Democrats are calling for a complete takeover of the healthcare system, and they want the government to make decisions for you because they feel the government can make decisions better than you can. You know, one other point, as Americans, I think we should be really fed up with this whole healthcare mess. In 1992, Bill Clinton ran for president. He said, I'm going to fix healthcare. He put Hillary in charge of a commission to come up with something. She came up with a national health insurance plan. The Americans soundly rejected that. And in fact, in 1994, the House of Representatives, after 40 years of Democratic majority, switched to Republican, and we didn't get it fixed. Every president since then, George Bush and now and then Obama, said we're going to fix this. President Obama puts through something that doesn't reach any of the goals. The goals of health care should be, and we can talk about what order they should be in, but the goal should be highest quality care, the most reasonable price, and try to cover as many people as possible. The Affordable Care Act missed on all of them. Premiums went up faster than they were going up before. Because we lost our health plans and couldn't see the doctors we wanted to see, quality has gone down. And although they tout it helped cover a lot of Americans, what it did was we had 85% of the public had health insurance before Obamacare. 91% have health insurance now. So the whole plan helped 6% of the population, 85 to 91, 6% of the population, about 20 million people. Meanwhile, the rest of us who were reasonably happy with our health insurance prior to Obamacare, we didn't like the cost, but we were happy with the service, we had to suffer as a result of this Affordable Care Act. So it didn't reach any of the goals. We need to come up with a policy now to finally fix this. The American public should be extremely fed up with our government arguing back and forth with each other and not coming up with solutions to very difficult problems like health care.
Wasn't it fundamentally just a scheme to redistribute the wealth so that you take from the middle class and you make their health care more expensive so that you can pay for the Medicaid expansion, really? I mean, the large majority of people, the large majority of people that were supposed to get coverage as a result of Obamacare comes from like Medicaid expansion. You agree with that?
I certainly do. In fact, most of the Democrats' policies are geared, and when you talk about redistribute wealth, what you're saying is you're taking money away from people that have earned it and giving it to people who, for whatever reason, have not earned it. You can't keep doing that because it destroys the incentive for people to go out and produce and expand the economy and improve themselves if they know that the more I work, the government's just going to take it away from me and give it to somebody else. It also is bad for the people who are getting something, with all due respect, I'm not criticizing anybody here, but it's bad for the people who are getting something that they haven't earned. That gives a false sense of being about people and really makes them worse off too. President Trump's got the right idea. Expand the economy, have it grow, create opportunity for everybody so that we don't need these wealth redistribution programs. But you're right, what Obamacare did was redistribute wealth away from people that earned it and give income to people who, for whatever reason, did not earn it.
Dr. Michael Bustler, we appreciate it as always, public policy analyst, and your take on the economy. Folks, he's a professor at Stockton University, a professor of finance, and you can read.
Talk of Northeast Arkansas. This is News Talk 101.3 FM and 12:30 AM KBTM Jonesboro, an EAB radio station.
For the other side, that they overlook the flaws in their own arguments. So part of the problem is to let's first remember that we're on the same team and try to work out solutions that will solve the problems we're facing. We have a $21 trillion debt that's going to grow in the coming years to $28 trillion in just a couple of years, and that's going to detrimentally affect my children and my grandchildren, and nobody's doing anything about it because they just fight with each other all the time and blame the other side.
Well, nobody cares about the debt anymore, Jim.
I know that.
They don't. I mean,
and they should.
Yeah, I mean, we should talk about it all the time, but nobody cares. I mean, they think, well, we spent $21 trillion, nothing bad's happened, so we might as well spend $40.
Well, that's a very it's a very damaging.
I mean, I know, but I do think that. I mean, you know, where are the consequences for doing this? I mean, I think they'll happen someday. But because they haven't happened, people just don't have any motivation to change the behavior in the spending. And so, I mean, I certainly agree with you there. I mean, we've been hearing about a coming complete economic collapse for a long time, and I know Republicans, they talked about it a lot. I talked about it a lot, but you know, no one really talks about it now. I'll admit that.
Well, to me, it's a moral issue because it's affecting my children, my grandchildren, and it may not affect you. It may not affect me. Maybe we'll escape, but it will come to roost one day, and our children will pay the price.
Mm-hmm. Well, so let's talk about some of the solutions. Okay, you say we need to try to solve the problems we can solve. Well, okay, criminal justice reform. I mean, this is something that they're working on right now. It appears to be bipartisan. Not everybody on the right is happy about it. But, you know, it looks like it's going to pass right now. So, hey, that's a positive sign.
It is. Infrastructure is something they can work on together as well. And these are things that should have been addressed some time ago. Mm-hmm. And so there are no magic solutions. There are no easy answers. I don't claim to have a magic wand that I can wave and fix all the problems in our country. But I've asked 5 questions in my book that I think are worthy of asking. And the first is, when a legislator issues a policy or makes a policy or makes a new law, we should ask ourselves, is it good for the majority of Americans? Not just for a few, but for a majority. Second, I ask, is it true? The reason why the subtitle of this book is called Rebuilding Team America in a Post-Truth World is that post-truth has seemed to come into vogue because people are basing their decisions and their thoughts on their feelings and not on objective truth. And so the key question is it true? A third question I asked is it good for our kids? Sometimes policies or decisions are good for me, but they're not good for my kids. For example, during the Iraq War, we issued a tax cut. That was good for me. I got money in my pocket. I was happy. But unfortunately, our children and grandchildren have to pay for the deficits that those tax cuts created. And fourth and fifth, I asked, would 2 key persons in history support these decisions? And I pointed to Abraham Lincoln and Jesus. Would Abraham Lincoln concur, and would Jesus approve? And whether you're a Christian or not, I believe that the teachings of Jesus are something we should all emulate. And so
those
in
are
the context of this.
Go ahead, keep going. I'm sorry.
In the context of those 5 questions, I think we can address many of the issues in our country. I try to focus on the fact that we're on the same team. I try to focus on the fact that we're all Americans. I try to emphasize country over party. And yes, I know people have strong values, and strong beliefs, and strong differences of philosophy and opinions, but at the end of the day, destroying each other is not going to solve our problems. It's not going to help our children. And we need to stop the insults, stop the name calling, and solve our problems.
At what point, though? I mean, you say we need to do, you know, I don't see that agreement. I guess, you know, I know none of us have all the answers. I guess at what point is it acceptable for Americans to pick the lesser of 2 evils? And I've come to realize that seems to be what's going on. I mean, for example, if the other side, Jim, we're talking with author Jim Hester. He is the author of the book 2 Tribes. You can check it out on Amazon. You know, if the other side wants to pursue policies that historically have resulted in
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
I want to welcome to the program. I want to introduce an author. He's the author of The Boy Crisis, Why Our Boys Are Struggling and What We Can Do About It. His name is Dr. Warren Farrell. Dr. Farrell, welcome, sir.
I'm looking forward to being with you.
So tell us a little bit about your book. What is this crisis that our men or young men are facing today?
Well, I guess about a dozen years ago or so, I was speaking around the world in one of my other books, and teachers in Japan and Australia and places like that would come up to me and they'd say, you know, I'm having more problems with the boys in my class than I am my girls. And as I started doing the research on this for what became the boy crisis, I started seeing that this is not only true in the countries that I was happening to go to, but in all 63 of the largest developed nations, boys were falling behind girls in every single academic subject, and especially in reading and writing. And then I also saw they were far ahead of girls in suicides. That is, when boys and girls are 9 years of age, they commit suicide equally. When they're between 10 and 14, it goes to twice the number of boys that commit suicide as girls. Between 15 and 19, it's 4 times as often. And between 20 and 24, it's 5.5 times as often. And so after finding about 70 different areas where boys were doing worse than girls, I started to realize that this was, obviously, what was there about developed nations that was leading to boys falling so much farther behind in some place that was supposed to be more advanced. And I saw that there were 2 major factors. One was that the boy crisis basically resided where fathers did not reside, and they resided in divorced families. When the father, not all divorced families, but in divorced families where after divorce the father had minimal contact or no contact with the children, and they were involved among the families where the mothers were not married when they had a child. And in the United States, I was shocked to see that 53% of women under 30 have children without being married. And many of them say, well, I'm living with a man, what difference does it make? But even among the women who are living with a man when they have a child, those children remain involved with their father an average of only 3.5 to 4 years. And it's in that group of children where problems arise, but while they arise for the girls who have no father contact or minimal father contact, they're much more intense for the boys.
Wow. This is a confirmation of what I have definitely heard before, and that is that the traditional family structure, as it goes, so goes society, right?
I'm afraid this is the case. You can argue about the morality of being married versus not being married, but when you have children, the children do so much better when there is father involvement, as well as mother involvement, of course, but mother involvement is almost a given unless the mother is a drug addict. But when there's father involvement, those children, girls and boys, do well. Girls, for example, are far less likely to become pregnant out of wedlock when they're teenagers, when they have father involvement. So in Baltimore, they studied children that were pregnant without being married as a teenager, and 30% of their children were also pregnant without being married. But among the ones that had father involvement, it went from 30% to 0%.
Wow.
And anyone that knows anything about social science research will tell you 0% negative behavior among human beings is almost unheard of.
That is incredible to me. But it's common sense. It's common sense that isn't. It's also not politically correct. But to say that, hey, if you have an intact family, specifically with women or young girls, their fathers are going to be protective of them when it comes to something like sex and the danger of getting pregnant out of wedlock. And it's almost as if men were made for that in a way.
Yes, and it's actually protected. What I discovered was that there's a number of different, what I would call dad-style parenting and mom-style parenting, and they're really both very helpful for children. So, for example, but most of us know that moms are nurturing, tend to be nurturing, and tend to be quite protective and cautious, and that's all accurate. But what very few people know is what dads contribute to, what dad-style parenting contributes to the health of the boys and the girls. And so, among the things that dads do differently is they're much more likely to enforce boundaries. So, for example, if the mom says, moms and dads will set boundaries the same way. They'll say, "Sweetie, you can't have your ice cream until you finish your peas." And kids will test boundaries the same way. They'll say, okay, I had some more peas. Now can I have my ice cream? And mom will say, well, I'll tell you what, you only had a few peas, but have 10 more peas, let's say, and then you can have your ice cream. And then the kid has 5 more peas, and mom thinks to herself, okay, I'm not going to get into a big argument over a few peas. Okay, you tried, thank you, you can have your ice cream. Dad will say, is much more likely to say, excuse me, we have a deal here. The deal here is finish peas. You can finish your peas and have the ice cream, or you cannot finish your peas and have the ice cream. And the kid goes, oh, you're so mean. And Dad, is more likely to say something like, well, you can continue whining, and there'll be no more ice cream tomorrow night either. And so what the kid learns from the dad's method is that he has no choice but to finish the peas, and therefore. And with mom, the child learns to manipulate a better deal. And so the children raised predominantly by moms, 30% of them are likely to have ADHD. Children raised predominantly by dads, only 15% have ADHD. And you can see a reason from that example. The children raised by moms do not learn to focus on finishing their peas, so to speak. And the dads, the children raised by dads, are far more likely to focus their attention on doing what they need to do. That dynamic of boundary enforcement that dads are more likely to do sets up a dynamic of an outcome of postponed gratification. And postponed gratification is the single biggest predictor of success. And so,
wow.
And then with the girl that we're talking about before with the pregnancy, part of what happens with dads is, like dads and their children, girls and boys will tend to roughhouse a lot, and so the girls are getting a sense of how to be with a man on levels where of physicality without being sexual with the man, and so so the comfort level of girls with boys becomes much deeper and more nuanced, and so girls learn how to talk with boys and confront them and be confronted by them and be teased by them, and so on. And so when they're in the beginning of a relationship, they don't feel that the only thing they can do to be able to hold on to the boy is to be sexual with them.
Wow.
And they're also learning postponed gratification, which is, yes, I want to be physical, but maybe I need to hold off until it's the right time, the right boy, the right person.
Wow. We're talking with Dr. Warren Farrell. He's the author of a book that I'm sure many of you out there right now want to go and get. It's called The Boy Crisis, Why Our Boys Are Struggling and What We Can Do About It. I want to talk here in a second about screen time and what these tablets and stuff are doing to our kids' brains. But before I do, I do want to say, Dr. Warren, do you feel frustrated at all that a lot of your research, the results that you're finding from these social studies, are not politically correct at all?
Yes, and you have hit the nail on the head in a deeper way, because my background is I was on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City. I made my living. I was probably the best known male feminist in the world, and so when I started finding things that were contrary to what the feminists were saying, I went from doing very, very well financially to going from like 50 speaking engagements per year down to 0 to 1 speaking engagement per year. So you can imagine how that affected both my fame and my finances. And so, but I decided to do the best I could to follow my research, and some of the research supported some of the things the feminists were saying, but a good portion of it, especially when it came to families and fathers, we were completely at odds. The feminists focus on the freedom for women. I don't want to go over break time, so I'll continue this after break.
Yeah, well, we still got a lot of time. We're not going to break anytime soon. So.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
So the feminist perspective was, we want women to be free, to have free choice, and my response was, everybody wants, or at least I want, women to have freedom of choice. But when a woman makes a free choice to have a child, she makes a free choice to put her children's interests above her interests. And so you don't have a free choice to be irresponsible, to hurt somebody else's life. And when the research is crystal clear that children do so much better when fathers and mothers are both in their lives, and then we need to take on that responsibility with our free choice.
Wow. Again, the book is The Boy Crisis. The author is Dr. Warren Farrell. I have this story in front of me about the National Institute for Health study probes the impact of heavy screen time on young brains. I've been following this for a while. We are an Arkansas-based news program, and obviously here in Arkansas, we've got tablets and we've got phones. Other people may not think so, but we do. We've got them. And we're using them, and we're addicted to them, and our kids see us use them. And I guess I'm a new parent. I've got a 1.5-year old toddler, and it's my my life's really been changed radically. And what you were saying about boundaries completely identifies with both how my wife interacts and how I interact with her, and it's absolutely right. But tell me about these tablets and these phones. What are they doing to brain development?
Well, if a child has parents who are not good at the boundary enforcement, like you said, then there's a problem. I mean, sometime on mobile phones is probably not too bad. A certain amount of time with video games is not bad, but with video games, boys are far more likely to be addicted to video games. The average video game playing, this is data from a few years ago, for boys is 15 hours a week. That's where it begins to start getting addictive. For girls, it's only 6 or 7 hours a week. When it comes to mobile phones, the average teenager now spends about 4.5 hours a day on his or her mobile phone. Girls and boys are about equal on that one. But the initial data from the NIH study that you're talking about shows that the amount of time that we're spending on the mobile phones, and this is just mobile phones alone, is leading to a premature thinning of the brain cortex. The brain cortex is the outermost layer of the brain, and that part of the brain is important for processing information, for thinking better, for being able to judge and compare different outcomes, and also it's important for language. And so it's very important. But the solution to that problem is the boundary enforcement. Parents sometimes come up to me and they say, Dr. Farrell, how can we get we agree with you, but our son and our daughter, they come to the table with their cell phones and they don't want to give them up. Well, as soon as a parent says that to me, I know something. And what I know is that the children are in charge of the parent, not the parents are in charge of the children. And so the parents say, well, what can I do? And there's a lot of things you can do. You can just take the cell phone away. If that doesn't work, you can cut off the money that you're putting out to pay for the cell phone service. If that's a problem, if computer use is a problem, you can take the computer out of the room and put it into the living room where you can see what the child is doing on the computer. There's a huge amount of leverage that parents have, but they're so afraid of being not a good friend to their children or losing certain types of communication. But in fact, children have an enormous need for boundaries. It makes when children are without boundaries, it's like somebody being in the dark and not knowing what on a platform and not knowing where the end of that platform is. They're wanting to know what they can and they can't do, especially when it's in their self-interest.
And you know what? In the deaths of millions. So if the other side wants to pursue policies that essentially their end game is, hey, we think we should take all of private people's money, put it into one big pot, and divide it up equally, i.e. socialism or whatever you want to call it, can you understand why some people are going to go with whatever the alternative to that is because they know that that's wrong? And I think that's why a lot of Americans, when they were given the choice between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, I think they went with Hillary Clinton. I'm sorry, that's why they went with Donald Trump instead of Hillary. I mean, do you understand that or disagree with me?
Well, I'm not advocating socialism by any means.
No, I didn't mean to attribute that to you. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, I think, when I asked earlier about the goals, what are our goals? We don't agree on what the goals are. If one side is wanting to drastically change society, and I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that.
Well, I'm not sure I totally agree with that. There are certainly segments of society that want to do that on both levels.
Exposing the truth and everything the Marble Palace establishment keep trying to cover up. It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
I would also say to that is, if it's true that it's thinning the cortex of the brain, then that's harming your kids. And
yes, it is. It could be thought of as child abuse.
Yeah, so let that motivate you to, you're now we're talking about health consequences. So, and being able to process information, being able to critically think about stuff. I mean, you're really setting your kids up for failure here. And I say this as somebody who is, like I said, a new parent. And I could easily see myself in moments of frustration. Here, take this phone and entertain yourself because I'm just exhausted or whatever. I mean, it also is a discipline. It's an exercise in discipline on the parents as well.
Absolutely. It was started with TV when I was a kid. I have a 1.5-year-old grandson, so I guess I'm a little bit older than you are. And I remember when I was a kid, the challenge was, finally parents had a babysitter, sit them in front of the TV and we could watch that. And there was, there were problems with screen time there also. But now the data is very clear that children do not do as well when they have a lot of screen time, and especially boys who are addicted to video games and identifying with heroes. But there is a lot of ways around that. The one I was saying was boundary enforcement. Another important thing to remember is that the problem with the addiction to video games and to screen time is that it increases the dopamine, which is the feel-good drug of the child. And so everyday conversation does not increase the dopamine of the child as quickly. And so that's what creates the addiction process to, I want more feel-good drug, okay, winning that video game or, calling my friend or responding to that text, that's something new. I've got to respond to it, and it's that immediate gratification. And it's that immediate gratification that is the predictor of not doing well. But not doing well is more than not doing well in school. When a child, especially a boy, does not do well in school, he begins to see the teachers praise other kids that do better. And when it comes to male-female time, girls don't want to date losers; they want to date winners. And so, if he can't, if he doesn't have that postponed gratification to be able to rehearse for the football team or the basketball team or for the play, or to do his homework, he's seen as a loser. So girls aren't interested in him. So he goes to porn because porn has access to a variety of attractive women without feeling rejected at a price he can afford, and so he starts getting addicted to things that addict him to more and more dopamine, and so increasingly the everyday conversation with a girl or just another person feels more boring, and so it becomes a vicious cycle of danger for the child.
Let me ask you this, and this has been a fascinating interview. We're talking again with Dr. Warren Farrell, author of the book The Boy Crisis. When it comes to the crisis that our young men are in, does any of it have to do with economic opportunity in terms of use of our hands? I mean, a long time ago, men were using their hands. They were building stuff. They're just very physical with their labor. Those jobs are diminishing now. And then as far as development goes, our schools are cutting recess time. Where I remember I would run around when I was growing up till I was absolutely exhausted, just getting all that energy out. What factors come into play if you consider the reality of what I just said?
Yes, every single thing that you've just said is right on target. So we're in a culture which is going from muscle to mental. And so when I was a kid, there were about 25% of the kids in the school were much more, oriented towards what we used to call shop and physical things, and most of them became mechanics, or they did something physical with their hands, or they, after they graduated, they didn't, if they graduated, and so there was a place for the non-academic boy in that physical labor. And in Japan, they recognize this. 25% of the students are in vocational education programs, and 99.6% of the graduates of the vocational education programs get jobs. Whereas in the United States, a lot of the non-academic boys drop out of high school, and among high school dropouts, more than 20% are unemployed in their early 20s. Now, unemployment is one thing, but for a boy who's unemployed, that means no woman falls in love with a boy on the unemployment line. So he not only has no job, he often has no girlfriend, or no girlfriend that wants him for anything but some quick sexual interaction if he happens to be tall and good looking. But ultimately, he's always rejected, and that sends a lot of boys into depression. And in worst-case scenarios, the suicide that I mentioned at the top of the program, becoming almost 6 times as great for boys as girls in their early 20s. And you can see all of this come together. But the two solutions on the more superficial level, but important ones, are the schools have to return to having significant, complex vocational education programs. When I say complex, I mean so, for example, welder is a physical job mostly, but to be a really top-notch welder, you have to know chemistry, you have to know physics, and boys can learn chemistry and physics even if they're not academic, if they have a goal. Boys are very much oriented toward goals. If they see the practical application of something they're learning in the relatively immediate future, they will sit down and they'll learn something that they will not learn if it's taught in a more abstract way without a goal involved in it. So vocational education, and then recess is important. The Centers for Disease Control have just come out with a study showing that when every minute spent at recess is actually more useful for studying for a test up to a certain point than studying for the test itself. So boys have to have a balance between they have to get rid of their physical energy, as you were just suggesting, before they're ready to settle down and focus.
Wow. Dr. Warren Farrell, author of the book The Boy Crisis. We really appreciate you being with us, why our boys are struggling and what we can do about it. You have a Merry Christmas, sir, and I'd love to have you on again soon to talk about, the culture wars that we're a part of right now.
I'd be happy to. And between Farrell and Harrell, we'll do it together.
Okay, sounds good. Between Farrell and Harrell.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Folks, we got to take a break. Back in just a moment.
and the right. But the majority of people in the middle, I don't think, approve of that. And so I don't think a socialistic president will ever be elected because the majority of Americans will not support that. So there are some people on the left that advocate these things that will not get elected president because they don't have national support. And so let's try to focus on the 60% in the middle, or the issues we can agree on first. And I realize we won't solve all the problems. We won't come to agreement on all issues. But we can accomplish a number of things by focusing on the middle, focusing on the things we agree on, focusing on the common ground, and not letting the extremists on both the left and the right dominate the scene.
Okay. All right. I think that's actually really, really good. So, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if I had to pick an issue for the left to completely abandon, to quit focusing on the fringe, it would be the pronoun wars. I'm talking about completely dismissing this section of their party and not being worried about using proper pronouns, compelled speech. This what I think is like a new class Marxism, us against them mentality. And I will admit I'm in a conservative Republican bubble, so I don't know what we should get rid of on the right. Do you have a suggestion?
Well, I'm not focusing on what to get rid of. I'm focusing on what to focus on, focusing on what to emphasize. And there are issues that we can agree on. We need to agree that there's a need for health care in this country. Whether you agree on the details, that's another story, but there needs to be health care in this country that works. There needs to be a strong military. I'm a former military officer. I served my country proudly. I served with the Green Berets. I served in Europe.
Wow, thanks for your service.
And I believe that we have to have a strong military because there are enemies. It's a dangerous world. So we can agree on the fact we need a strong military. We can agree on the fact that we have a $21 trillion debt that needs to be solved.
Yeah.
We have a crumbling infrastructure system. So let's focus on these issues that we can agree on. And some of the other issues may never be solved. But the problem is, with our current system, it just goes back and forth every 4 years. An administration comes in, tries to obliterate everything from the previous administration, and then when that party loses power, it just starts all over again and goes back the other way. So history has a cycle. It moves in cycles of 20 to 30 years, conservative, liberal, and lately it's been accelerating and going back and forth like so fast it makes your neck snap. So my emphasis is let's try to focus on long-term solutions.
The intersection of conservative ideas and reality. Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Welcome back to the program. Congressman Rick Crawford joins us again. Rick, it's always great to have you on, sir.
Hey, man, no Johnny Cash today?
Well, that was actually a Johnny Cash song. It just has a really long intro, but that's "I'll Be Home for Christmas" by Johnny Cash. But it took forever to get there.
Oh yeah. All right.
Sorry, I'm sorry to disappoint.
It's okay.
Let's talk a little bit about the Farm Bill. What are your thoughts on the Farm Bill? I know it's we got progress there, right?
We did, and I mean there were some naysayers, that talked about it's just more of the same. That's just not true. We didn't get everything we wanted on the nutrition title, but here's the upshot here that I think people need to understand. We still have control in the administration. So while we didn't achieve the statutory accomplishments we wanted to with regard to these work requirements, the Secretary has the authority to implement those anyway. And so he'll implement everything we were asking for legislatively. So then the argument is, well, then the next administration can come in and undo it. Yes, that's true, but not without the PAYGO requirement. And so when you see when they realize the benefits and savings that this brings to the federal budget, and then you've got the obstacle of PAYGO to be able to compensate for that, this is a big win. This is big deficit reduction. And so I think people need to recognize that while we didn't accomplish the statutory changes,
Which were what? Basically limits on the food stamps, because the food stamps is like 80% of the bill, right?
Right, and so basically what we were trying to do was to codify reprogramming those dollars toward career and technical education. So basically requiring that if you're going to receive these benefits, if you're between the ages of 18 and 59, that you've got to be either working 20 hours a week or in an approved and funded CTE program, then that not only is that good for us from the standpoint of finite resources in the form of taxpayer dollars, but it's also good in helping improve people's personal economy and getting them an on-ramp, to success. And so I think this should be viewed as a win, even though we didn't accomplish that statutorily. The authority still exists for the secretary to administer those programs, and he will begin to promulgate rules almost immediately to reflect what we were trying to accomplish in the House version.
Well, and I think that's good.
As said, I think it's a win for us. And then as far as on the ag side, mostly the continuation of the previous policy. So continuity is always good. I mean, you can't do anything with certainty, but you can do some things with predictability. And when you've got Mother Nature as your business partner, you need all the predictability you can get. And so if you can help sort of predict these programs and maintain continuity, that is a significant accomplishment as well.
Well, and you got to know that the farmers out there were watching this carefully, just because there is a little uncertainty out there with the tariffs and everything that's been going on internationally with China. And I think farmers are like, come on, we don't need any delay here. We don't need another thing to worry about. But what are your thoughts on the new developments with the 90-day halt to increases in tariffs with China?
I'm encouraged. I'm cautiously optimistic, and I understand. Farmers, their patriotism is probably, they can only stand so much, when it starts to affect their bottom line. And so I applaud our farmers for, their understanding of what was trying to be accomplished here. There's some good news in that, we just got a deal on some soybeans. They're going to go out of the port in Seattle, the Northwest. And so I had somebody on Twitter, so how does that benefit Arkansas farmers? Well, I mean, clearly they don't understand how grain markets work. Grain is fungible commodity on the global market, in the global marketplace. So moving grain is good for everybody that grows grain. So while they're not necessarily buying Arkansas soybeans, they're buying and helping to relieve the pressure of backstocks that are depressing prices. So that's how it benefits Arkansas farmers. So I just wish people, when they comment on Twitter, they would comment with some basic understanding before they jump out there and say crazy things like that. But the reality is, I'm less concerned about what port the beans move from and more concerned about the fact that they're moving. And what that does is provide some support. And you can look and see what the markets have done. I think we're at somewhere around 920 for March beans right now. Maybe give or take 5 or 10 cents. That's a significant upturn. We don't know what the future holds, but I'm seeing more and more economic activity in China that shows that they are in a very precarious position, that they're having an inflation problem, they're declining growth, their retail sector is not enough activity to offset it. As I've said all along, their economy is not in a position to sustain these tariffs, and we're seeing the evidence of that now. Yes, it was a burden for us, and it continues to be, and I think what we're seeing now is the beginning of the end of this tariff posture that's going to open those markets back up. In the interim, what we've seen is U.S. farmers looking for opportunities to expand market access outside of the Chinese market. That's a big market to try and overcome and offset. But we're seeing some positive trends so that we don't have to have all our eggs in one basket. Yes, that's a big part of our export picture. But to the farmers' credit, and exporters, they're finding some inroads into other countries to improve our market picture without necessarily having to rely exclusively on China.
I mean, I'm encouraged as well. We're talking with Congressman Rick Crawford. A lot of people, congressmen, thought that President Trump's approach here, because it really hasn't been done very often, was going to be disastrous. They say things like, well, trade is just too hard and everything else. But it appears, like you just said, China needs access to our market, and their economy just couldn't handle this. I mean, again, we're cautiously optimistic. Everything could be done away with. I guess, they arrested that CFO from Huawei, which I thought was strange. There's a lot of things that could happen to upset the negotiations. But so far, it appears that President Trump's strategy is working.
Well, and that's really what's making people mad. The fact that, I mean, here's a guy who is not, subscribing to, the established dogma of how trade deals work. He's results oriented, and if he has to shake things up to do it. Look, I'm not trying to be a Donald Trump apologist, but I'm just saying when you call out a win for a win, okay? So I think we're on the brink of winning here with regard to how China conducts itself in the marketplace, not just for the United States, but for the rest of the world. Let's get real about what China's plans are. China's plans are to supplant the United States as the preeminent economy in the world. Ultimately, they would like to supplant the U.S. dollar as the standard reserve currency for global transactions. They would like for their currency to rise to that level, and they know, and they're caught. They can't continue to operate the way they are and expect to achieve those goals. And so, even in their own interest, they had to make some adjustments, because if they're to be held up to the standards that they think they should be held up to, it starts by playing by the rules. And they have not played by the rules for decades. They continue to flout the WTO rules. They continue to do their own thing, lie, cheat, steal, forced technology transfers, intellectual property theft, counterfeiting products. You name it, they do it. And that is not how an economic superpower operates. And if they expect to be treated like an economic superpower, they're going to have to change their ways. And that's all that President Trump is saying and doing to back that up. And so what that does is benefit U.S. producers. And I'm not talking about just ag producers. I'm talking about anybody that is in today's economy. You're a global player, whether you want to be or not. If you're producing a product or good for sale somewhere, you might as well understand that you are in the global marketplace, because you're either exporting your product or you're competing with products that are being brought into our market. In either case, you are participating in a competitive global marketplace. And for that to work and be fair, you've got to have the other participants playing by the rules. And that's all I think that Donald Trump was trying to establish, is that, by gosh, y'all are going to play by the rules, and we're going to see to it that you do.
We're talking with Congressman Rick Crawford a little bit on trade here. Now, Congressman Rick Crawford, he is on the House Intelligence Committee, so he is privy to a lot of information. A lot of information I know he can't share with us. But yesterday, Congressman, there was an interesting development, I thought. An oversight panel on the Clinton Foundation met yesterday, a subcommittee, and they talked to two gentlemen who are financial investigators who have submitted a probable cause claim to the IRS about massive problems with the Clinton Foundation. His name is John Moynihan and Larry Doyle. Now, Mark Meadows was pretty upset that they wouldn't turn over all of their documents, because they're under the impression that they won't qualify for a reward with the IRS if the IRS accepts their claim. But some stark admissions, Congressman Crawford. We found out that they submitted to the IRS evidence of an ongoing FBI investigation out of Little Rock into the Clinton Foundation, a 747, which a lot of people said was some conspiracy. They referenced that in their testimony, a 747 landing in Little Rock, being loaded with documents and flown back. Pretty explosive stuff. I click off at the end of the testimony, and what do I see? I see the the Wall Street Journal saying President Trump's inauguration is now being investigated, and I just thought, wow, we can't win for losing here. What's your reaction to all that's been going on?
Well, this is a classic redirect. The fact of the matter is the Clintons have been misbehaving for years, and I think, finally people are coming to the realization that something has to be done about it. But do you think that the media are going to say anything about it? No. They're going to do everything they can to insulate the Clintons from any kind of, public opinion adjudication, if you will. So here's the thing. Like I said, it's been going on for years, and the problem with the media is that they have been so fully invested in first, with the Clintons, then the Obamas, and, so on, that they don't want to be wrong. They don't want to admit that they made a mistake. And so rather than just say, look, we messed up. We gave them too much credit for being people of character. We gave them too much credit for being, forthright and above board. No, because they've been so fully invested in it that they can't admit or won't admit that they were wrong. And look, I'm going to tell you, if they would just come clean and say, look, yep, we blew that call, but now we've got to start covering it honestly, maybe we'd get some coverage on this from the mainstream media. But it's not happening. And so, you're not going to see, the average Joe on the street doesn't have a clue that Secretary Clinton was running a pay-to-play scheme as Secretary of State. But the evidence suggests that she was. And the Clinton Foundation, the revenue that they generated during her years as Secretary of State indicate that she was running that kind of a game. And then you can see now how their donations have tailed off just, more than just considerably, almost, to nothing by comparison. And so these people have information that they're trying to get out. They're being threatened to some degree. I mean, so it's a classic cover-up, and there are still some Clinton acolytes within the federal government that are, doing everything they can to also derail, redirect, whatever they can do to try and take attention away from this. But this is going on.
Yeah, and not to mention, there's a lot of people that have a lot to lose here. Was some of the testimony from these financial investigators, they basically said, look, they were not operating under the rules of a nonprofit the way you're supposed to, which would mean if the IRS does actually investigate this, they're going to find that the people who have given the Clintons millions and millions of dollars, they got to write that off as a tax-deductible donation. And all of a sudden now all of their donors are going to owe money to the IRS. Mm-hmm. I mean, so there's it's a lot bigger than just the Clintons.
Well, it is. I mean, and so anytime, you involve the IRS, they can delve into, cracks and crevices that you would rather keep covered up, I'm sure, and they can do it with a microscope and make it very uncomfortable for people. And so there's going to be a whole lot of folks that are kind of going, we had no idea. But at some point in time, people are going to be held to account. And when they're held to account, that's when you're going to start hearing them complain about how this foundation was run. Mm-hmm. And when you might start to see a little bit more coverage of it, when you reach a critical mass of big donors asking the question, how come we were told one thing and it turns out it's another, and now we're going to have to we've got a tax liability that we didn't anticipate, and some fairly significant.
One last question. I know we got to go. James Comey testimony behind closed doors that was released, and we found out, I guess, that former director of the FBI didn't remember a whole lot of what happened when he was the director.
Mm-hmm. Well, you and I go back a long way on this issue, and we talked about this back when he came out and made the announcement about the Hillary campaign. He made the statement that in this environment, no prosecutor would bring charges against Hillary. Well, I told you then I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. I've done that, and I can see now that, I reserved judgment at that point in time. That's been over 2 years ago, I guess now. I reserved judgment, and since I've been on the Intelligence Committee, I've seen him for what he really is. And he has got a serious problem. And I don't know what his game is, but I can tell you what it's not. It's not about the truth. This guy has lied. He's lied to us in front of our committee. He's lied to the American people, and he's continuing to do it. This is not the Boy Scout that he purported to be. And he's got some serious problems. I don't know what his long game is, but I can tell you right now he is completely compromised and conflicted, and I have no regard for him.
Wow. That is, you heard it there, folks, from Congressman Rick Crawford. Congressman, appreciate you coming on. Merry Christmas to you, sir, and your family.
Same to you. Merry Christmas.
All righty. Rick Crawford, everybody.
Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. Are you a conservative-minded young person and want to let the world know about it? Are you tired of rolling your eyes as your professor regurgitates progressive, PC, neo-Marxist nonsense? Then you should interview on Conduit News Radio's Young Conservative segment and tell us about why you believe the way you do. Tell us how you came to be a conservative and what are your views on government. Now, if you're worried that your neo-Marxist professor may also be a right-wing talk radio listening masochist, then names can be changed to protect the innocent. It's the Conduit News Radio Conservative Future segment. To be interviewed, call 870-275-9799. That's 870-275-9799. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
And the right. But the majority of people in the middle, I don't think, approve of that. And so I don't think a socialistic president will ever be elected because the majority of Americans will not support that. So there are some people on the left that advocate these things that will not get elected president because they don't have national support. And so let's try to focus on the 60% in the middle, or the issues we can agree on first. And I realize we won't solve all the problems. We won't come to agreement on all issues, but we can accomplish a number of things by focusing on the middle, focusing on the things we agree on, focusing on the common ground, and not letting the extremists on both the left and the right dominate the scene.
Okay, all right. I think that's actually really, really good. So, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if I had to pick an issue for the left to completely abandon, to quit focusing on the fringe, it would be the
Need your daily news fix? Don't forget to tune in to Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Folks, hey, welcome to the program. Thanks so much for being with us today. We have this headline here, in hour number 2, by the way. Headline over at Fox News, an opinion piece by Mr. Daniel Turner. France yellow vest protests should be a lesson for green activists in the United States. A city on fire, he writes. Cars burnt to ashes, a national monument defaced, 10,000 tear gas canisters and stun grenades used against protesters. In 1 week, Paris transformed from the City of Lights into a battle zone. It's important to understand how we got here, he writes. Daniel Turner from Power of the Future actually joins us on the phone. Daniel, welcome back to the program, sir.
Paul, thank you for having me on again.
Yes, sir. So tell us, how did we get here? How did France arrive at the place it's at right now?
Yeah, and I appreciate you reading my op-ed that was on Fox News, and it's actually escalated even since then. They are on 5 weeks now of protests in France, and it really started because their president, Emmanuel Macron, pushed through a new series of carbon taxes, all in the name of climate change. And that was the point of the op-ed. Gas, oil is already very expensive in France because they are not producers. They have to import everything. And added on top of that was an enormous punitive tax that was raising the cost of gas to roughly $7 a gallon for the average French citizen. And again, this was a tax put on because Macron said, we as Frenchmen need to lead the charge in fighting climate change. And we're going to do that by, scratch your head, punishing the people of France. And so a number of Parisians and men and women of France took to the streets and said, why does our president hate us? Why are you punishing us because of the sins of China and India and Malaysia and the countries that do pollute? Why are we having to suffer the consequence? And this is what green activism is, and this is what people like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez want to bring to America.
You know, it's interesting you say this is something that green activists in the U.S. can learn a lesson from. Now, we don't necessarily have yellow vests, mandated to be stored in our cars, so I don't know what Americans would protest in. But what can we learn, or what can green activists here in America learn from what's happening over in, what's supposed to be progressive Europe?
Exactly. Yeah, I think they could learn that there isn't a national appetite in the United States for sure, and in France in general, and in most of the first world nations, but this is not the way to go to advancing their belief in climate change. You can say what you want about your belief in climate change and whether or not mankind is contributing it due to his lifestyle, but the solution cannot be punishing men and women who are just trying to drive their kids to school, trying to commute to work. And it's funny that the green activists and who lead these charges, I've mentioned Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and people like Tom Steyer and Mike Bloomberg, who fund a lot of the green activism here in America. You just have to look at their private life and ask them if in their private life they will ever live voluntarily the type of mandates that they want government pushed on the rest of us. Bernie Sanders has 3 houses. I don't begrudge him that. I wish I had 3 houses. I don't even own one. These are people who fly on private jets. These are people who jet set around the world. One of the greatest Hollywood advancers of climate change is Leonardo DiCaprio. And again, you don't just need to pick up a copy of People magazine to see the $500,000 a week private yacht he charters in the Caribbean. I'm not begrudging them this lifestyle. I think it's wonderful that they have been so blessed that they can afford to do these things. But they do not live in their private life what they want the rest of us mandated by government to live. And that's why I started this organization, for reasons like that.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if this is, they feel the need, like Leonardo DiCaprio. I don't know if he really believes this stuff. I think maybe I think it's more like a tithe. I think he has to tithe his opinion, to his to the people that feed him, meaning the big studios and everything else. I really do think that's a possibility. I have no evidence to back it up, but it's just a thought. But if you really believe this stuff, you wouldn't, you just simply wouldn't be using the amount of fossil fuels that you're using, period,
Exactly. The Daily Caller newspaper publication put out about 2 weeks ago an article. They had looked at all of Bernie Sanders' filings for campaign purposes, and in the last month before the midterms, he had spent over $300,000 of campaign funds on private jets. Totally legal, totally compliant. He filed the paperwork as required. People write checks to BernieSanders.com, and he can use the money for these purposes. But here is a man who is pushing radical green policies in America, who spent $300,000 in 1 month on private jets. Why couldn't he fly commercial like the rest of us? Even more so, if he really believed in the evils of fossil fuel, why wouldn't he ride horseback to some of these campaigns?